If you found out today that you had cancer, I'm guessing that you would probably want to treat it immediately with the best medicine, the best treatment, the most rapid response that you could possibly get to get through it and to get into remission. Am I right? Well, I know a psychiatrist who refers to depression as cancer of the soul, and I think she's probably right. My name's Dr. D. I'm an ER doctor turned psychedelic medicine enthusiast, and I want to talk a little bit about this idea of depression being cancer of the soul and why it's so important to get it treated effectively and in the fastest means possible. So let's talk about the analogies between the two. First of all, a lot of times when cancer is coming on, we don't know it, right? It's not identifiable. It's in here somewhere. Well, I think the same thing can be true with depression. When it's starting, we don't necessarily see that it's depression. We just notice that we're getting frustrated a lot more easily, or we notice that things are just starting to overwhelm us that normally wouldn't. Just daily responsibilities become like climbing Mount Everest. Or maybe we just don't really notice, but we start waking up with this sense of dread, this heaviness that patients tell me that they have. And so cancer is the same way, right? It comes on slowly. All of a sudden, we have a mass or we start having symptoms. We get some tests done and we find out that we have cancer. So they can both come on very quietly, subtly, but that doesn't mean that they're not dangerous. So the other analogy that I would make with this is that cancer left untreated starts affecting other parts of the body. It's called metastases, right? So, I mean, you might have prostate cancer, but it doesn't really show up until it starts causing bone pain because it has metastasized to the bone. Well, I think the same thing is true with depression. Like, we maybe don't necessarily notice it, but it's starting to affect other areas of our lives. For one, just depression can affect us physically. So it can literally start affecting other areas of our body. You know, those high cortisol levels can cause us to have extra weight packed on, developing belly fat, which causes its own downstream problems, right? Heart disease, stroke, even Alzheimer's is considered type 3 diabetes because it's so linked to insulin resistance. So stress, high cortisol, depression can lead to that. It can also affect how our thyroid performs, even how our sex hormones work, which does then affect the sex organs. But so depression can cause those changes in us physically as well. But also this idea of metastasis, right? It starts spreading and affecting other areas. So maybe initially I'm just the one struggling, but then that starts spilling over into my relationship with my wife, or how I'm parenting my children, or my relationships at work or my friendships, even perhaps causing me to no longer enjoy doing things that normally would fill my cup, like going on bike rides or hiking or playing guitar. Those things just start shutting down. So like cancer, depression can start affecting these other areas of our lives. And we got to pay attention to it, because the longer that goes untreated, just like cancer, the longer that goes untreated, the more destruction is going to occur. And the more difficult time that we're going to have getting those things back into balance. It's still possible, but it becomes more of a challenge the longer we just let this depression keep brewing. But the other analogy that I want to make is similar to some cancers. There's very targeted, specific treatment that's available for depression. And I'm not talking about SSRIs. The data on those is not really great. They honestly don't work much better than placebo when you really get in and look at the studies, especially looking over a long time window. But there is very targeted treatment that's available. I said at the beginning that I'm an ER doctor turned psychedelic medicine enthusiast. And a big reason for that is because my depression itself was treated back in 2020 with ketamine therapy, which is Indiana's only legal psychedelic medicine. But my point is that if we get in and we start treating that depression, anxiety, PTSD, we start treating it now, then we can minimize that effect on our health, but also on everything around us, on our relationships, on this ripple effect that we see when people start really struggling with their mental health. So why does this treatment work? Well, there's lots of research happening in multiple psychedelics right now. I mean, huge institutions that are studying these things, but I'll speak specifically to ketamine. The reason why we become depressed and anxious is because of what chronic stress has done, actually making structural changes in the brain. See, it's not probably a chemical imbalance or a lack of serotonin. It's really this loss of neuroconnections that happens in the brain as a result of chronic stress. So over time, right, life is hard. There's issues with finances and our spouse and work and in people who are vulnerable like me, those issues lead to these structural changes in the brain where we have less neural in a couple of key areas. The prefrontal cortex is this area that's involved in decision making and planning. So everything starts feeling overwhelming, right? And then this other area in the hippocampus and amygdala, these areas are involved in our emotional regulation. Even memory formation happens there. But we start losing this ability to really rein in those emotions so we can become more reactive. Clearly, that can damage our relationships, right? When I just say the first thing that comes to my mind, when my spouse does something that I don't like, and then I'm just spewing off. But a lot of that comes from lack of brain health. And so this targeted therapy to treat cancer of the soul, it's almost like cutting out the cancer. But what it's really doing is it's restoring brain health, because within 2 hours of one infusion, these neurons, these nerves in the brain start establishing more connections in these areas that have been suffering because of chronic stress. So I want to encourage you, if you struggle with depression or anxiety, if you've been troubled by PTSD, pay attention, because the longer that this goes on, that you don't effectively treat that. And I see people they're in treatment with counseling and meds for years, maybe decades, right? And yet they're still struggling. And in my mind, that's because we haven't gotten to that root cause. We haven't fixed the brain to make it healthier, because I believe once the brain gets healthy, brain health translates into mental health. And counseling is great, but I think sometimes our brains just aren't healthy enough to lay down these new pathways. Our counselors tell us one thing, we're trying to adopt that. But at the end of the day, we're still stuck in these ruts in our head, these neural paths that have been laid down over years and decades, where we just can't change the way that we think. And one of the things these medicines do is they take those ruts and they grade them, right? Like they have heavy equipment and they're grading over the ruts so that we can lay down new paths in our brain so that we can think differently, which allows us to respond to our environment in a completely different way, a way that we can think long-term. Instead of saying in the moment the exact thing that comes to mind that I want to say that's going to be a big zinger, but it's going to damage my marriage, it allows me that space so that I can pause, so that I can think, no, what long-term outcome do I want from this? And I don't want to just spout off the first thing that comes to my mind. But with this medicine, with a healthy brain, I've noticed that I've been able to rein that in and process things in the moment rather than being so reactive. So if this is something that you think could help you, reach out. We'll get you in, do a consult. We'll have a phone call, whatever that looks like. I just want to see people get healthy. I want to see cancer of the soul eradicated, because I think that has so many upsides in not only our individual lives, but in our community that surrounds us. Because when people have healthier brains, they just do life differently, and they tend to not be right there on the brink of just losing it and falling apart and going on a rampage and verbally cutting everybody down. I think it makes the world a better place when we're all healthy. God bless you guys. I love you.